Thanks, fellows, staffs, and students and guests for coming out today. I want to make sure this may be my only chance to speak before the entire RCC, so I want to invite all of you to come, if you're ever in Canada, to come visit me in London, Ontario. Because I know, of course, there's no reason you'll ever be in London, Ontario, but I hope that that will ensure that I get invitations from all of you in return. So I'd like to thank Helmut, and Helmut is here somewhere, and Christoph as well, and generally, Christoph called me the master of disaster when he introduced me last. So I want to make note that he is the guru of the LMU. He is the mentor of the centaur. And I want to thank that volcano virtuoso, Katrina, for that introduction, especially suggesting that I have actually accomplished things in my career. At the moment, I don't feel like that because I'm writing this book. It's not a book that I have been writing for 15 years. It's a book that I have not been writing for 15 years, which I don't recommend to students. So it's nice to be reminded that I have actually done some other things. And I'm very grateful for the opportunity that Rachel Carson Center is giving me to finally put this project to paper. And as Katrine, for that other project, which is a climate project that was able to bring 900 boxes of Environment Canada material to my archive, to my home university archives, 1.6 million pages with that now, all the meteorological observations from 1840 to 1960 Canada. If any climate interests and want to talk sometime about that, that would be great. But unfortunately, I can't talk about both today. The fire book is Environmental History of the Miramichi Fire of 1825, which is arguably the largest recorded forest fire in Canadian history. It is inarguably the largest recorded forest fire in eastern North America. It's the first forest fire mentioned in most histories or lists of historic forest fires. And it's really the first fire that got North Americans worried that we could actually burn the place down. So my book treats fire not as a discrete event, but positions it in relation to larger processes of changing relations in nature in colonial British North America. It's the fire's cause, the fire itself, and its effects on ecology and society. In my talk today, rather than give you a précis of the book, what I'm going to try to focus on is one thread that runs through. I thought there might be some Americanists so one way of would be talking about the disaster, how it was shaped by the fact that it crossed the Canadian-American border. I'm going to start here. No, I'm not. I'm going to start here. For a time early this century, the Red Cross hosted a website called Disaster Relief. It contained information on historic natural disasters. Its list of forest fires begins with this 1825. This helpful. No longer online, but it's you can find it on the Internet Archive. Can anyone explain this map to me? No? No, for sure, but I think what it's trying to indicate is that this 1825 fire burned in Maine and instead of the province of New Brunswick in Canada, in the town of New Brunswick in New Jersey. I think that's what it's trying. Fire is emblematic of how the cross-border continues to skew understanding of it. So today I'm going to discuss the significance of the cross-border nature of the fire from three distinct perspectives. In the short term, in terms of the international charity effort in response to the disaster. In the longer term, in seeking to establish the fire cause and assigning blame. And third, and this one is really my central focus, in the very long term, in defining the fire's range and its core, and the effect of that on what has become the public and the memory of the fire. Okay, 1825 was the hottest of the 19th century. September and October, a huge fire complex sweeps across northeast North America. On the 7th of October, I think I have a pointer, a massive fire burns in the center of Maine. It's about 3,400 square kilometers. Still, history, or at least it's been defined at around 3,400 square kilometers. The very same day, October 7th, 1825, fire burns Brunswick. Brunswick, I realized, is almost exactly the same size as Bavaria, which might help. Early reports estimated the fire to be, and virtually every single commentator over the first of the following generation confirmed it to be about 1/5 of New Brunswick, 1,000 square kilometers. This area of the amalgamated two villages of Chatham and Newcastle, the Miramichi River goes through different ways. The region is called region. And that area is said to be roughly 100 kilometers, 150 kilometers, 15,000 square kilometers. It's known whether these two fires in New Brunswick and Maine touched each other. Is known to have died killed in the communities along the Miramichi, and perhaps quite a lot more. Maine and New Brunswick are quite similar. Terrain is similar, geology they're quite similar. Zones are quite similar, climate, they suffered the same summer. Even similar of settlement and development at this time. Maine had been known as a timber colony since the late, or timber state since the late 1700s, and only became in 1820. New Brunswick had been a colony since 1874, but it was really after 1815, at the end of the Napoleonic Wars, that the region had started much like Maine. And the boundary between Maine and New Brunswick at this period was unresolved. The settlers and lumbermen ignoring the boundary, this boundary, and traveling. So we'll start with charity. How the international was and wasn't reflected in the after effects of the fire. Immediately after the fire arose throughout North America and Europe to help its victims. The most people displaced, the most property loss, it quickly became the sole focus of the charity. And charity was not to nor defined by the border. Americans gave very generously, in fact. They were led by newspapers between among rival cities. New York raised $4,000 in a single day. All the churches in Boston raised collected funds for ships north. And this impressed for two reasons. One, if you remember, America and Great Britain had been in war, just War of 1812. And also they were between Maine and New Brunswick was sometimes as a way to repair America's relations with Great Britain and her colonies. It's also impressive, of course, how much given the United States because of Americans suffer as well in Maine. Yet funding for either in the U.S. or anywhere else. Charity was neither limited to nor defined by the of Maine neighbors to the and this solidarity comes a couple of years later. The fire was experienced in such apocalyptic fashion in the charity effort. So much money was raised that when there were still trees left to be cut down, there were still reasons to live in this place. There was a backlash. The fire wasn't such a big deal after all. Later, a newspaper a letter indicating that no American working in the Miramichi had received The Brunswick Relief Commission thought this so slanderous that they published this broad listing all of the American citizens who had in fact. At that point, shortly after the fire, the idea that the national border would have in any way shaped the distribution of charity was simply not tolerated. The border, they insisted, did not. Okay, so that was a quick introduction to the charity and how, at the time, the border is kind of meaningless. But as time passed, the ways the fire was reported began to diverge across the national border. And this was evident, for example, in seeking to establish the fire's cause. And here comes the spoiler. There's no way we can figure out what the cause was. We don't even know if this is one fire, two fires, many fires. No way to determine. There's no smoking gun at the end of this story. But this did not stop commentators from assigning blame. And the way they did so show how the fire took on cultural meaning, how it was employed to fulfill social goals. And since in the two societies, in Maine and New Brunswick, became different. Forestry had been so profitable, and profitable so quickly, that in the years prior to the fire, the young settlements in the Miramichi constantly criticized. They'd been criticized they'd been criticized by politicians because they weren't moving quickly. Agriculture, which was considered the true foundation of a colony, the appropriate pursuit of colonists. Young men with too much money in their pocket who did the sort of thing young men with too much money in their pocket tend to do, meant that the region was fire swept through the region, destroying foresters and presumably destroying tree, interpreted as red in New Brunswick, just as evidence that forestry alone make. In that period, in the first generation or two of the fire, foresters are constantly being blamed. The governor, even while the Miramichi is still smoking, comes to the region and makes sure to accuse foresters as being the reason for the fire, with no real evidence. Of course, the 19th century, when forestry continued to thrive, began to be that the Miramichi was good farmland, that it was not well suited to agriculture, that it was well suited to forestry, and that forestry had made the area what it was. At that point, the game started to shift, and accounts by the middle and onward 19th century are the settlers clearing land of agriculture that actually started the blaze. Now, this is absolutely possible, of course, just as much be agricultural clearing, could be forest clearing. The fire. I'm trying to make here, it was built on no different evidence. So in Brunswick, we have the causes of the fire become related to and meshed with. There's a suggestion of society pushing back, that it's not so much politicians, press, whoever, telling society to behave, society pushing. States' land agents were in the disputed territory along the Brunswick border from trespassers cutting wood illegally. Meadow hay was a sideline commodity from officials could as easily as they could seize timber. So their instruction, heat wave, even during an intense fire season, was to burn the hay. There's no evidence that the land agents actually therefore then spread, but the idea themselves were for the fire, that was too tantalizing not to spread. The legend in the 19th century, with the moral of the fire, became government overreach, that they pushed this on the settlers, that they were trying to settlers, and the result was this huge, even to the point where it was with business. Here we have this quote from Indian Chief John Neptune, accusing one of the agents, Captain Chase, and not just fire, but intentionally to burn out the Penobscot Indians. Now, what I that since the agents were eastern Maine, and because prevailing winds travel west to east, the chance of them causing fire in central Maine, which was the core area for the fire in Maine, it's pretty unlikely. It's actually much more likely that they cause fires that then swept into New Brunswick. But here's where the international border starts to show up. The fire that burned Maine reappears the fire in Maine, but as far as I can tell, it's never appeared in reference to the fire in New Brunswick. Okay. I'm heading quickly. I know at the beginning of the talk, Christoph said 60 minutes at most, maybe 70, 75, but actually I'm going to try to move it along pretty faster than that. Don't worry. Okay. I've already pushed my way through the first two sections. In discussing the charity effort, I showed that the early effort to define and maintain that as a unifying event between the two nations. I try to show the growing divergence over time between the two societies' understanding of the event. The society developed their own reason to interpret the fire in their own way. And in this, we quickly trace how and why the geography and memory of the fire changed dramatically across the almost 200 years. Now, a good research into this fire has exactly fires were burning in September and October 1825, and I've come up with this map. This it gives you discovered fire burning right around this, as reports diaries in the Ottawa along the Ottawa River. Here. In a large number of areas, about it. The point being, of course, this was not October 7, 1825, but it was burning over a much larger area than that and over a larger time. The newspapers naturally described the fire in terms of damage to property and proximity to towns. One in Maine touching a whole explicit. Of course, that's possible. Maybe fires did burn in populated areas, but I think it's also possible that the fires in populated areas, less traveled areas without local newspaper areas, northern Maine, west, which is in the and the initial reports in many specific places burning. They weren't trying to fire; they were into a fire burning all. Cleared began to impose around, and that's what I think. Natural disasters tend to consolidate like water beating on a surface. The analogy is something like, you know, if you drowned in New Orleans on August 30th, 2000, you would probably be considered of if you drowned in the pool, or if you drowned a week later, maybe you would be considered part victim of Hurricane Katrina. That disasters traits over time. In this case, the Maine and New Brunswick components of the fire drew away from each other, consolidated in two different sections. Their stories increasingly separated by the national border. The two core reported areas of damage became imposed. One northeastern New Brunswick, and the lesser one in central Maine. And since those were quite separate, both distant from the border, the fire was pulled conceptually apart. fire comes to be known as the Miramichi Fire in reference to the site image. And that really only begins to solidify in the mid-19th century. I've got examples of that. They're not. Here's George talking about the book, Great Fire. She probably the most extensive and terrific conflagration in history. In the 1850s and 60s, it's always previous. This point is becoming evidence and the frequency of the term. You can see the after 1850 or so the name takes off, but that's not great evidence because it is the frequency of the term Miramichi Fire with the fire is being. The name came to refer to fires that the right onto the present. There's in talking about the fire, calling it the Miramichi Fire. I even as fire, which is to me kind of nobody really thinks that there's one continuing the flame going. The fire was mentioned a lot in the 19th century. It was considered one of the great natural disasters of the 19th century, though perhaps the 1871 Peshtigo and Chicago fires eventually supplanted it. But undoubtedly the fact that the Miramichi was defined by a Canadian site of damage meant that over time Americans wrote about it in or Maine, contributing to the fire's place broader historical record. So it's less and less through the 20th century. That's the general record, and even it begins to be less and less in the 20th century. And I think that's because of this guy here. W.F. Ganong, he doesn't look at his best there, I wouldn't think, but he was actually one of the leading historical geographers of the United States and Canada in the early 1900s. He was from New Brunswick, in the U.S. He attempted to map the fire's boundaries. Now, he worked through the same sources I did, and then he sought the opinion of a well-known contemporary lumberman who assured him that the fire couldn't possibly have been as big as it was because there's just so many dang still there. Ganong published an article with this map, and in it he argued that the fire's size had been greatly. It likely burned intensely around 1,000 square miles, these dark areas here, and burned very intensely around a much larger area. Now, like my fire map over northeastern North America, Ganong's map suggests the fire areas. But his method seems to have been that if he didn't have documents of the fire burning at a place, he assumed it didn't. And since traveled areas are less likely to offer such evidence, big blank spaces on his map. Ganong became the standard way of interpreting the fire over the past century. I imagine Ganong in 1906 looking out over the Miramichi, trying to confirm the historical sources that he's reading from the early 19th century to the he saw around him, and I think he unwittingly used nature against itself, using its restorative power to discredit its destructive power. Okay, so I'm heading towards the end here. I'm going to use visualizations because everyone's so big on visualizations these days, and the United States. The fire occurring over a wide region, yet over time, fire grows more distinct. This is because there are two core areas, and when memory is consolidated in the fashion that typically follows a disaster, they consolidate it separately. But it was also because as histories of forest fires of New Brunswick, of Maine, of US forestry, of Canadian forestry came to be written. Whether part of the fire happened on one side of the border or another increasingly determined how or even whether that part was discussed. Since more deaths and damages occurred on the Canadian side, the Maine side was written about less, and because there are 10 times as many American writers as there are Canadian writers, in America there are topics, all written about less. Then came, and I admit meant to, Ganong comes even more, and it retreats further into the realm of myth to the point that reads as an explanation of this history, with its Canadian component not just effaced but replaced outright. So the international border meant nothing to the 1820 fire, presumably the border, or nothing about the border would stop it from doing so. The border, international border, has actually meant a great deal to how that fire has been remembered. Okay, I'm going to wrap things up with the so what question, which is a tough one. I have no problem. Particularly for me right now. I have no problem with that question if it means how does this history, whatever, help me understand the world. But I think that subliminally it often means with my own work. That I'm not sure at all I can help you with today. And frankly, I'm not sure I need to, because respect, I'm not writing this for you. Talk New Brunswick. About the fire. And as happens in New Brunswick, a blizzard. Talked about Canada. You know, I had to go home anyway, so I thought having the talk, and I thought I'd be lucky to get 10 people. And we had about 175. That's because to the people of New Brunswick, the Miramichi fire is still the most well It's the most famous event that's ever happened in New Brunswick, and yet, of course, the killer did some pretty good work in the 50s, but and yet, where was my and yet to that? Yet, the longest sustained historical treatment of is 9 pages, 190 years later. Nobody's about it. It's long entered the realm of myth without ever really getting a chance, a place in the realm of history. So part of my interest then is exploring, explaining how, why that might have been. So I would say that unapologetically I was drawn 15, the international border I've tried to talk to, really gotten me allowed to pull out national strands as well. That's it for me. Thank you for your attention.